Hey, this is Mr. Drogemeyer. Thanks for joining me for our Algebra 1 lesson videos. Today we are in Unit 4 and looking at lessons 10 and 11, which is called Evaluating and Interpreting Functions. And so we'll start with the word interpret. Um, if you're going to interpret something, and in our case, we're talking about mathematical statements, we're trying to understand what they mean. And in our definition there, it says we're going to translate that mathematical statement into a real world context. So if you think of the word translate, it's talking about going from one language to another. And so we can think of this as going from mathematical language into more of a real world everyday language. And so these are going to be taking word problems, information, and interpreting it into a math context. So let's take a look at this first example. So it says a makeup artist charges $65 to travel to a wedding, plus $30 per hour for the makeup she's doing at the wedding. So she gets $65 to travel there, and then for every hour that she works, she's getting another $30. And so it says that the bride receives a bill for $125. So the total that the makeup artist charged is $125. We want to know how many hours did the makeup artist work at the wedding. And so we want to start by writing an equation that's going to model that situation. Well, anytime that we have a problem like this where we need to come up with an equation, we want to first of all focus on what is the question that they're asking. What are we trying to find? And so if we go to the question, it says, how many hours did the makeup artist work? All right, so hours is what we are trying to find. And so I always like to define my variable. X is going to represent hours here. And again, you could use you could use H, you could use any letter to represent that. I'm just going to use X this time. And so X is representing how many hours she worked. All right, so then let's look at the other pieces of information we know. We know that she gets $65 to travel to the wedding, and then she's getting $30 per hour. So if it's per hour, we know that that 30 has to be multiplied by the number of hours. So that's one piece of information that we have right away. We can multiply that 30 times X. That's going to give us part of what she's getting paid. Then she's also going to get that $65. She doesn't get that for every hour that she works. She just gets that one time as a flat fee for traveling. And then finally, we know that the total that she charged the bride was $125. So when we add those two pieces together of the money that she earned, our total is going to be $125. All right, and so at this point then, we have an equation. We can solve this equation for X to find the number of hours. And so in solving this equation, we want to get that variable by itself. We want to isolate it. So my first step here would be to undo that addition by 65. So I'm going to subtract 65 from each side. Because if I do it to one side of the equation, I have to do it to the other. That leaves me with 30x on this side. On my right side, 125 minus 65 is 60. And so now I know that 30x equals 60. 30 times x equals 60. If I want to solve for x, I want to undo that multiplication by 30, which means I'm going to divide each side by 30. So if I take 30x divided by 30, I'm left with just 1x or x. And if I take 60 divided by 30, I'm left with 2. And so that means that the makeup artist worked 2 hours to make that $125. Now, I also wanted to kind of talk about this in terms of graphs as well. We, in our last lesson, looked at graphs of functions and how those work. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my Desmos calculator here, and I'm going to put that equation in that we created. So it was 30x. Well, I'm just going to make a function here, first of all. So our function was 30x plus 65. So she was making $30 for each hour plus the $65. And so what we wanted to know was, when would f of x equal 125? Well, f of x is our y-axis here. And so I just wanted to show you in Desmos, you can change these graphs, how they look. Right now, our scale, 125 is going to be way up here if I use it the way it is right now. Well, if I go into graph settings here, that little wrench, I have the option of changing what my x-axis or my y-axis look like. And so I'm going to change this y-axis. I'm going to have it start at 0, and I'm going to have it go up to, uh, let's just have it go up to 125. Well, let's make it 130 so we can see it a little bit better. All right, and so now I can see right at 125. Get my cursor on there. You'll see that when x is 2, y is 125, or f of x is what we were using here. And so just another way of looking at that. And so when I go back to what we did when we calculated, we said that when x was 2, the total billing amount was that $125. All right, so just another way to look at that. Just wanted to try to include that Desmos calculator when we can. All right, second question here says how much Julio made on Friday is represented by the function f of x equals 4 plus 8x, where x represents the number of hours he worked that day. So again, our variable, they've defined it for us. X is the number of hours, and they're telling us that this represents how much money he made on that day. And so the question here now is, how much did he make on Friday if he worked for 7 hours? All right, so if I want to know how much he made, well, remember, f of x represents the amount of money that he made. X is representing the number of hours. Well, they told us that he worked for 7 hours. And so that means that we're going to replace X with 7 because we know how many hours he worked. So I'm going to take that equation, 4 plus 8x, and I'm going to replace X with 7. And now I'm going to do this calculation. So order of operations, I do the multiplication first. 8 times 7 is 56. And so it's 4 plus 56. And so that would tell me that he made $60 on Friday when he worked 7 hours. And so again, we could use our Desmos calculator here again. If I put in that equation of 4 plus 8x, so let me clear that off. All right, so now our function is 4 plus 8x. We want to know if he worked 7 hours. So when x is 7, and I'm going to need to scroll up a ways here. Again, I could change my my view if I needed to, but when x is 7, f of x is 60. So 7 hours is $60. Again, the same thing we came up with when we used the algebra to solve it. So again, just wanted to show you how that works. And then finally, our last question here, they've given us a graph, and they want to know what's the value of x when y equals -2. Well, so remember, x-axis is our horizontal axis, y-axis is our vertical axis. And so when y is -2, that's down here. Well, when y is -2, on our graph, we can see that it looks like x is at -4. So when y is -2, x would be -4. All right, so you need to be able to read a graph, interpret a graph like that. All right, and that's everything I have for you for this lesson. Appreciate you taking the time to watch. If you have questions, please let me know. Thanks. Have a great day.